My name is Tamara Blackwood. I'm 29 years old, and I'm about to tell you something that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. What I'm about to share isn't just my story, it's a web of secrets that stretches back decades. Secrets that connect to things you couldn't possibly imagine. I need you to listen to every single word. Because what happened to me, what I discovered, what I did in return, it's all connected to something much darker than simple family cruelty. And I promise you this, if you stick around until the end, you'll understand why some revenge is worth waiting a lifetime for. Why some secrets are worth keeping in the shadows. And why sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones capable of the most unforgivable betrayal. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. I was 7 years old when I first realized my family saw me as broken. It was Christmas morning, 1995. Snow fell outside our Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts, the same house where my great-grandmother had supposedly practiced. Well, let's just say the locals had stories. Stories my family always dismissed with nervous laughter. My parents, Margaret and Richard Blackwood, sat watching my older brother Marcus unwrap his gifts. A chemistry set, advanced mathematics textbooks, a microscope that cost more than most families spent on Christmas entirely. Then came my turn. I tore open my single present with the excitement only a child can muster. Inside was a coloring book. Not just any coloring book, one designed for children aged 3 to 5, the kind with thick black lines and simple shapes. "We thought this might help you focus on staying inside the lines," my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for explaining why I was disappointing. "Art should have structure, Tamara." "Rules." My father nodded approvingly. "Your brother understands the importance of precision. Perhaps you'll learn too." Marcus, then 12, smirked from across the room. "At least she can't mess up coloring." "Much." I clutched that coloring book like it was treasure. Because even then, I understood something they didn't. Art wasn't about their rules. It was about truth. And truth, I was beginning to learn, was something my family feared more than anything. That night, I found my grandmother's old art supplies in the attic. Oils and brushes hidden away since her death 3 years earlier. The same grandmother my parents never spoke about. The one whose portrait hung in the hallway with her eyes scratched out. I painted my first real painting that night. A winter scene, but not the pretty Christmas card version. This was winter as I felt it, cold, lonely, beautiful in its honesty. When I showed it to my parents the next morning, something shifted in their eyes. Fear. "Tamara," my mother said, her voice barely a whisper, "where did you learn to paint like this?" "I just knew," I said. My father snatched the painting from my hands. I watched through the kitchen window as he burned it in the backyard, the flames licking at something that had come from deep inside me. That was the day they began their campaign to kill the artist in me. But here's what they didn't know. Some things can't be killed. They can only be buried. And buried things have a way of growing in the dark, getting stronger, waiting for the right moment to claw their way back to the surface. The years that followed blurred together in a symphony of systematic humiliation. When I was 10, I entered a local art contest. I'd been working on a piece for months, a portrait of our neighbor's elderly dog, capturing not just his appearance but something deeper. The loneliness in his eyes that matched my own. I won first place. My family's reaction was swift and brutal. "Tamara won an art contest," my mother announced at dinner, her voice dripping with false pride. "Tell them what you won, sweetheart." $50 and... $50, my father interrupted. "Marcus, how much did you earn from your science fair project?" "The scholarship was worth $5,000, Marcus replied, not bothering to look at me. 5,000 versus 50, my mother mused. I suppose that puts things in perspective. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way they displayed my brother's awards in the living room while my art disappeared into closets and drawers. It was the way they introduced me to their friends. "This is Tamara, our creative one," they'd say, the pause loaded with apologetic embarrassment. When I was 13, I overheard a conversation that would haunt me for years. I'd come home early from school, sick with the flu. I was heading upstairs when I heard my parents talking in the kitchen with my Aunt Catherine, my mother's older sister. The girl is becoming a problem, Aunt Catherine was saying. She's too much like her. Don't, my mother whispered sharply. We agreed never to speak of that. Margaret, look at what she's drawing. The same themes, the same intensity. It's happening again. It won't happen again, my father's voice cut through like ice. We'll make sure of it. How? She has the gift. You can try to suppress it, but then we break it, my mother said with a finality that made my blood freeze. Whatever it takes. I crept upstairs, my mind racing. Who were they talking about? What gift? What had happened before? That night, I searched every corner of our house for clues. In the back of my mother's jewelry box, I found an old photograph. A young woman who looked exactly like me, standing in front of an easel. On the back, in faded ink, Isabella Blackwood, 1962. I'd never heard of Isabella Blackwood, but I would learn over the years that every family has secrets, and some secrets are worth killing for. High school was when their campaign intensified. I'd started selling small paintings to tourists who visited Salem for the witch trial history. Nothing elaborate, just street art that captured the town's haunted beauty. I was making decent money, enough to buy better supplies, to dream of art school. My parents found out when Mrs. Henderson from the local gallery called to compliment them on my work. Your daughter has real talent, she told my mother. There's something almost otherworldly about her paintings. They seem to capture more than just what the eye sees. That evening, my father sat me down in his study. Tamara, we need to discuss your future, he began, his fingers steepled in that way that always preceded his lectures. You're 16 now, old enough to understand practical realities. I want to apply to art schools, I said before he could continue. His laugh was sharp, cutting. Art schools. Tamara, do you know how many artists actually make a living? Less than 1%. Do you know what happens to the other 99%? I'm not other people. No, you're not, my mother said, entering the room. You're our daughter, and we won't watch you throw your life away on fantasies. They'd already enrolled me in business courses for my senior year. They'd thrown away my art supplies while I was at school, and they'd done something else. Something I wouldn't discover until much later. They'd been actively sabotaging my work. The painting I'd submitted to the state art competition, they'd convinced the school counselor to withdraw it, claiming I was too emotionally unstable for the pressure. The scholarship application to the Rhode Island School of Design? Somehow, it never made it to the mail. The portfolio I'd spent 2 years building? Gone. They claimed a pipe had burst in the basement, water damage, such a shame. But water doesn't selectively destroy only art supplies and leave everything else untouched. I graduated high school with a 4.80 GPA in business courses I hated and a heart full of murder. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what they'd actually done. Because destroying someone's dreams doesn't kill them. It transforms them. And transformation, I was about to learn, is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person who has nothing left to lose. The night before I left for business college, the college they'd chosen, with the major they'd selected, funded by the trust fund they controlled, I made a promise to myself. I would become everything they said I couldn't be. I would be so successful, so undeniably talented, that their cruelty would be exposed for what it was. And someday, when they least expected it, I would show them exactly what they'd tried to destroy. I just didn't know then that my revenge would uncover secrets that went back generations. Secrets that would explain everything about my family's fear of my art. Secrets that would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone in Salem who thought they knew the real story of the Blackwood family. The thing about revenge is that it's patient. It doesn't mind waiting. It grows stronger in silence, feeding on every slight, every humiliation, every moment when you smile and pretend their words don't cut you to the bone. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, revenge becomes something even better than payback. Sometimes it becomes justice. College was supposed to be my prison, but it became my sanctuary. Boston University's business program was everything my parents had promised: structured, practical, soul-crushing. But Boston was also home to one of the most vibrant underground art scenes on the East Coast, and for the first time in my life, I was away from their watchful eyes. I enrolled in night classes at the Museum of Fine Arts. I lied about my age, my background, my name. To my instructors and fellow students, I was Tamara Morris, a working-class girl putting herself through school. Not Tamara Blackwood, daughter of the prominent Salem family with the mysterious past. Professor James Chen became my first real mentor. A former protege of Georgia O'Keeffe, he saw something in my work that even I didn't fully understand yet. Your paintings, he told me after my first critique, they don't just show what you see. They show what others feel but can't express. That's not technique. That's gift. Gift. There was that word again. I threw myself into my art with the desperation of someone making up for lost time. I painted during lunch breaks, between business classes, through the night until my eyes burned and my hands cramped. I was painting the pain, the rage, the years of suffocation. And something incredible began to happen. My work started selling. Not just to tourists, but to serious collectors. Gallery owners began to notice. Art critics used words like prodigious talent and haunting intensity when they reviewed group shows I participated in. By my junior year, I was exhibiting under my real name again. I couldn't hide anymore. My work was too distinctive, too powerful. And I wanted my family to know. I wanted them to see exactly what they'd tried to kill. The first review appeared in Art News magazine. Emerging artist Tamara Blackwood creates works that seem to channel something beyond the ordinary realm of human experience. Her paintings possess an uncanny ability to reveal hidden truths about her subjects, as if she can see through the carefully constructed facades we all wear. I sent the article to my parents with a simple note. Thought you'd want to see what failure looks like. Their response came in the form of a phone call that changed everything. Tamara? My mother's voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. We need to talk. Come home this weekend. I'm busy. I have 3 exhibitions. Come home, or we cut off your tuition payments. The threat was real. My trust fund was still under their control until I turned 25. I'd been using the art money to supplement my living expenses, but I couldn't afford tuition on my own. I drove to Salem that Friday with a sense of dread that had nothing to do with their usual disapproval. The house felt different when I walked in. Colder, more watched, as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath. My family was waiting in the living room. Parents, Marcus, Aunt Catherine, and someone I didn't recognize. A tall, thin man in an expensive suit with eyes like winter. Tamara, my father began without preamble, we've made some decisions about your future. What decisions? The stranger stepped forward. Miss Blackwood, my name is Dr. William Hartwell. I specialize in helping young people who've become confused about their life paths. I looked from him to my family, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. You want to send me to a psychiatrist because I'm good at painting? Because you're obsessed, my mother corrected. Because you've lost sight of reality. Because you're starting to exhibit the same dangerous patterns as... As who? I demanded. Who are you so afraid I'll become? The silence stretched until Aunt Catherine finally spoke. Your great-aunt Isabella. The name hit me like a physical blow, the woman from the photograph I'd found years earlier. Isabella was brilliant, Catherine continued. Talented beyond measure, her paintings were extraordinary, but she became convinced she could paint the truth. Not just what she saw, but what was hidden. Secrets, lies, things people had buried. That sounds like good art to me. She destroyed lives, my father said sharply. She painted portraits that revealed affairs, corruption, family secrets that were meant to stay buried. She tore apart our entire social circle. And then, my mother added, her voice dropping to a whisper, she painted something she shouldn't have. Something about our family. Something that was supposed to stay hidden forever. What happened to her? Another long silence. This time, it was Dr. Hartwell who answered. She had a complete mental breakdown. Spent the last 15 years of her life in an institution, convinced that her paintings were cursed, that they showed too much truth for the world to handle. I felt something cold settle in my chest. And you think I'm like her? You paint the same way, Aunt Catherine said, with the same intensity, the same ability to see what others miss. The same dangerous obsession with exposing what should remain hidden, my father added. They wanted me to stop painting. Completely. To destroy my current work and focus entirely on my business degree. In exchange, they would continue funding my education and set me up in the family real estate business after graduation. If I refused, they would cut me off financially and have Dr. Hartwell evaluate my mental state. They had legal documents ready, power of attorney forms, commitment papers. I was trapped. But I was also curious about something else. What did Isabella paint that was so dangerous? My mother and father exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. That, my mother said finally, is exactly the kind of question that got her locked away. I agreed to their terms. What choice did I have? But as I drove back to Boston that night, I made another promise to myself. I would find out what happened to Isabella Blackwood. I would discover what she'd painted that was so terrifying it destroyed her life. And I would finish whatever she'd started. The next 2 years were a masterclass in patience and deception. Publicly, I became the perfect daughter. I dropped out of art classes. I focused on business. I accepted an internship at Blackwood and Associates, the family real estate firm. I dated a boring investment banker my parents approved of. I wore conservative clothes and spoke in the measured tones they preferred. But privately, I was conducting the most important investigation of my life. I started with public records. Isabella Blackwood had been born in 1940, the youngest daughter of my great-grandfather Edmund Blackwood. She'd shown artistic talent from an early age. The family had been proud then, before something changed. She'd attended the prestigious Parsons School of Design in New York, graduating with highest honors in 1962. Her early work had been celebrated, collected by museums and private collectors across New England. Then, in 1965, something happened. She'd returned to Salem abruptly, abandoning a promising career in New York. She'd moved back into the family home and begun painting portraits of local residents. But according to the newspaper archives I found, these weren't ordinary portraits. Local artist creates controversy with revealing portraits, read a 1966 headline in the Salem Evening News. Miss Isabella Blackwood's new series of paintings have caused quite a stir among Salem society. Several subjects have demanded the paintings be destroyed, claiming they reveal personal information that was never discussed during the sittings. Another article from 1967. Blackwood family distances itself from daughter's inappropriate art. And then in 1968, the final headline, local artist hospitalized following mental breakdown. She'd spent the rest of her life in Danvers State Hospital, the infamous psychiatric institution. She died there in 1983, alone and forgotten. But what had she painted that was so dangerous? I spent months tracking down anyone who might have known her. Most were dead or refused to talk. But I finally found Dorothy Wickham, 93 years old and living in a nursing home in Peabody. Isabella, she said when I mentioned the name, her eyes growing sharp despite her age. Now there was a girl who saw too much for her own good. What do you mean? She painted my portrait in 1966. Lovely girl, very talented, but when she showed me the finished painting, Dorothy shook her head. It wasn't just my face she'd captured. It was my grief, the loss of my baby that I'd never told anyone about, the guilt I carried for 30 years. How could she have known? That's what everyone wondered. She said she just painted what she saw. But she saw more than faces, child. She saw souls. And souls carry secrets. Dorothy told me about others Isabella had painted, a businessman whose portrait revealed his embezzlement, a minister whose painting showed his affair, a society matron whose portrait exposed her addiction to laudanum. She was painting the truth, Dorothy explained. The truth people spent their whole lives trying to hide. And in a small town like Salem, that kind of truth is dangerous. What happened in 1968? What made her break down? Dorothy's expression grew troubled. She started painting her family. The Blackwoods had secrets too, you see. Old secrets. Dark ones. And Isabella, she was determined to bring them all to light. What kind of secrets? But Dorothy had grown tired, her eyes clouding with exhaustion. Some things are better left buried, dear. Your great-aunt learned that too late. I left the nursing home with more questions than answers, but also with a burning certainty. Isabella hadn't been crazy. She'd been dangerous to people who had something to hide. And now I understood why my family was so afraid of my art. They were afraid I might have inherited more than just her talent. They were afraid I might finish what she'd started. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find Isabella's last paintings, the ones that had driven her to madness, the ones that had revealed whatever the Blackwood family was so desperate to keep hidden. And then, I was going to use my own art to expose the truth they'd spent 60 years trying to bury. But first, I had to play their game a little longer. I had to make them believe they'd won. Because the best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about making sure your enemies never see it coming. After graduation, I moved back to Salem and took my place in the family business. To everyone watching, I was the reformed black sheep, Tamara Blackwood, finally embracing her practical destiny. I worked long hours at Blackwood and Associates, learning every aspect of the real estate empire my family had built over 4 generations. But what they didn't know was that real estate gave me access to something invaluable: records. Property transfers, inheritance documents, family histories stretching back to Salem's founding. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to uncover the truth about my family. The Blackwoods had arrived in Salem in 1692, not as victims of the witch trials, but as profiteers. My ancestor, Jeremiah Blackwood, had been one of the men who bought up property from accused witches' families at a fraction of its value. Land that became the foundation of our family's wealth. But there was more. I found records suggesting that Jeremiah hadn't just bought land, he'd manipulated the trials themselves. Whispered accusations, forged evidence, all to acquire specific properties. 23 people had died in the Salem witch trials. And Jeremiah Blackwood had profited from every single execution. The weight of this knowledge was staggering. My family's fortune, everything we owned, everything I'd grown up taking for granted, was built on blood money, built on the systematic murder of innocent people. But this was old history, horrific, but not the secret that had driven Isabella to madness. There had to be something more recent, something current. I started investigating the family's modern business dealings. What I found made my blood run cold. Blackwood and Associates wasn't just a real estate company. We were developers, city planners, the invisible hand that shaped Salem's growth. And for the past 50 years, we'd been systematically buying up land with historical significance, not to preserve it, but to destroy it. Every site connected to the witch trials that wasn't already a tourist attraction. We'd bought it and built strip malls or parking lots. Every location where accused witches had lived or died, paved over. We weren't just profiting from Salem's dark history, we were erasing it. But why? What was so important about obliterating these sites? The answer came from an unexpected source, my brother Marcus. We were working late one evening, reviewing property acquisitions for the next quarter. Marcus had been drinking, something he'd been doing more of lately, I'd noticed. "Do you ever wonder," he said suddenly, staring at a map of Salem dotted with red pins marking Blackwood properties, "if we're doing the right thing?" "What do you mean?" "All this." He gestured at the map. "The development projects, the acquisitions. Sometimes I think we're trying to cover something up." My heart began to race, but I kept my voice casual. "Cover what up?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You really don't know, do you? They never told you about the covenant." "What covenant?" He looked at me then, his eyes focusing despite the alcohol. "Forget I said anything. I'm drunk. I'm talking nonsense." But it was too late. I had a name now. The Covenant. I spent the next 3 months tracking down any reference to something called the Covenant in relation to Salem or the Blackwood family. It was like chasing ghosts, hints and whispers, but nothing concrete, until I found the journal. I was cataloging items in the basement of a house we'd just acquired, a colonial-era home that had belonged to the Hooper family, another old Salem lineage, when I discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose brick. Inside was a leather-bound journal dated 1693, written by Samuel Hooper. The entries detailed the aftermath of the witch trials, including something that made my hands shake as I read. "The truth of Salem's darkness runs deeper than the courts dare speak. Those who died were not guilty of witchcraft, but they knew too much of other sins. Jeremiah Blackwood speaks of a covenant among the founding families, an agreement to hide the real reasons behind the accusations. He says the women died not for consorting with devils, but for threatening to expose the men who truly consorted with evil. The covenant binds 5 families: Blackwood, Merchant, Hartwell, Morrison, and Hooper. We have sworn to protect each other's secrets, no matter the cost. And if anyone threatens to expose the truth of what we did, what we continue to do, they will meet the same fate as those who burned. I fear what we have become. I fear what we have agreed to do. But I am bound by blood and gold to keep silent. Dr. Hartwell, the psychiatrist who threatened me, he wasn't just some specialist my parents had hired. He was part of this. The covenant wasn't just about covering up old crimes. It was an ongoing conspiracy, passed down through generations, designed to protect 5 families who had blood on their hands. But protect them from what? What were they still hiding? The answer came to me in a flash of horrible understanding. The witch trials had never really ended. I began to research missing persons cases in Salem over the past century. What I found chilled me to the bone. Every few years, someone would disappear. Always someone who was asking too many questions about Salem's history. Researchers, journalists, genealogists, they would come to town, start digging into records, and then nothing. Gone without a trace. And every time, their disappearance was preceded by contact with one of the 5 families, usually with an offer to help with their research. Isabella hadn't gone crazy. She'd gotten too close to the truth, and they'd silenced her the same way they'd been silencing people for 3 centuries. But here's what they hadn't counted on. I wasn't just Isabella's great niece. I was also my father's daughter. I understood how the family business worked. I knew how to access records, how to trace money, how to uncover what was hidden. And I had something Isabella never had: patience and a plan. Over the next year, I carefully documented everything. The property acquisitions designed to hide historical evidence, the pattern of disappearances, the financial connections between the 5 covenant families, the network of corruption that stretched from Salem City Hall to the state government. But I needed proof. Real evidence that would be impossible to dismiss or destroy. That's when I remembered what Dorothy had said about Isabella's final paintings, the ones that had supposedly driven her mad. If Isabella had discovered the covenant, she would have painted it. She would have created a visual record of the truth. And if I could find those paintings, I would have the evidence I needed to expose everything. The problem was that Isabella's work had supposedly been destroyed after her commitment. But I'd learned enough about the Blackwood family to know we never really destroyed anything valuable. We just hid it very, very well. I started with the obvious place, our house. The Victorian mansion where I'd grown up had dozens of rooms, hidden passages, and storage areas that hadn't been opened in decades. It took me months of careful searching. I could only do it when my parents were away, and I had to be meticulous about not leaving any trace of my investigation. But finally, in a sealed room behind the wine cellar, I found them. 17 paintings, covered in dust and wrapped in old sheets. Isabella's final series, created between 1967 and 1968. And they were extraordinary. Each painting depicted one of Salem's prominent families, but not as they appeared to the world. Isabella had painted them as they truly were. The merchants shone with blood on their hands. The Morrisons surrounded by the ghosts of their victims. The Hartwells with their faces twisted by lies and manipulation. And the Blackwoods. God, the Blackwoods. She'd painted us as demons. Literally. My great-grandfather Edmund shone with horns and claws, feeding on the suffering of innocence. My grandfather Thomas depicted as a serpent coiled around a map of Salem. My father portrayed as a spider, sitting at the center of a web that connected to every dark corner of the town. But it was the final painting that stopped my heart. It showed all 5 families together, gathered around an altar. But this wasn't a Christian altar. It was something older, darker. And on that altar lay a young woman, her throat cut, her blood flowing into channels carved in the stone. At the bottom of the painting, in Isabella's careful script, were the words, "The offering continues." I stood in that hidden room, surrounded by the truth my family had killed to protect, and I understood everything. The witch trials hadn't been about witchcraft at all. They'd been about covering up something much worse. The 5 families hadn't just profited from the trials, they'd orchestrated them to hide their own crimes. And those crimes were still happening. The missing researchers, the disappeared journalists, they weren't just being silenced, they were being sacrificed. The Covenant wasn't just about protecting family secrets. It was about maintaining an ancient pact, sealed with blood, renewed with blood, sustained by blood. And I was next. As I stood there in the darkness, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The way my parents had tried to control my art. The way they'd monitored every aspect of my life. The way they'd been so desperate to break my connection to Isabella. They weren't just afraid I'd discovered their financial crimes or historical guilt. They were afraid I'd inherited Isabella's gift for seeing truth. Because if I could paint what I saw, if I could create visual evidence of their ongoing crimes, it would be impossible to dismiss me as crazy the way they dismissed her. They would have to kill me. And suddenly, I realized something that made my knees weak. They were already planning to. Dr. Hartwell's recent visits to the house, the legal documents I'd glimpsed on my father's desk, the way my mother had been looking at me lately, with a mixture of sadness and grim determination. They were going to have me committed, just like Isabella. And once I was locked away in some private institution, isolated from the world, I would disappear just like all the others. But there was one thing they didn't know. I had been planning my revenge for years, and I was finally ready to execute it. The annual Blackwood family reunion was 3 weeks away. Every member of the extended family would be there, along with representatives from the other Covenant families, politicians, business leaders, social elites, everyone who mattered in Salem's power structure. They were expecting the return of the prodigal daughter, the reformed artist who had finally embraced her family legacy. Instead, they were going to get the truth. All of it. Painted in colors that would burn their carefully constructed world to the ground. The Blackwood family reunion was always held on the Saturday closest to Halloween, a tradition that, given what I now knew about my family, seemed grotesquely appropriate. This year, it would be held at the family estate. 300 guests, including not just extended family, but Salem's entire power structure. The mayor, city council members, business leaders, and of course, representatives from the other 4 Covenant families. They were expecting a celebration of our family's continuing prosperity, a chance to network, make deals, and maintain the carefully constructed facade that had protected them for 3 centuries. Instead, they were going to witness the complete destruction of everything they'd built. I spent 3 weeks preparing for what I privately called my exhibition. Working in secret in the studio I'd set up in the abandoned Blackwood carriage house, I created the most important work of my life. 7 paintings that told the complete story of Salem's true history. Not the sanitized version sold to tourists, but the blood-soaked reality that lay beneath our city's prosperity. The first painting showed the original Covenant. 5 men in colonial dress, standing over the bodies of the witch trial victims, dividing up their property like vultures picking at carrion. The second depicted the first modern sacrifice. A young historian from Harvard who had come to Salem in 1923, researching the real cause of the witch trials. The painting showed him bound to the same altar Isabella had painted, surrounded by the Covenant family's patriarchs. The third, fourth, and fifth paintings documented the disappearances I'd uncovered through my research. Each one showing a different victim, a different decade, but always the same 5 families, always the same ritual. The 6th painting was my masterpiece, a perfect reproduction of Isabella's final work, but updated for the modern era. The current generation of Covenant families gathered around their ancient altar, preparing to sacrifice their latest victim, me. But it was the 7th painting that would destroy them completely, because in it, I'd painted something they thought no one could ever know. I'd painted the location of the bodies. Months of research, property records, and careful observation had led me to the truth. Every piece of land the Blackwood family had preserved over the past century, every parcel we'd bought and left undeveloped, every conservation area we'd donated to the city, they were all graveyards. The victims of the Covenant didn't just disappear. They were buried on Blackwood land, their bodies hidden beneath the carefully maintained facades of historical preservation. And I had painted a map. The reunion began at 7 p.m. I arrived fashionably late, dressed in the conservative black dress my mother preferred, carrying what appeared to be a gift-wrapped painting. My contribution to the family history display. The great hall of the Blackwood mansion had been decorated for the occasion. Old family portraits lined the walls, including several of my own ancestors looking stern and respectable. Tables groaned under the weight of catered delicacies. A string quartet played chamber music in the corner. It was elegant, refined, and utterly false. "Tamara!" My mother swept over as I entered, her smile bright and artificial. "Darling, you look lovely. And what's this?" She gestured to the wrapped painting. "A surprise," I said. "Something I've been working on. A tribute to our family history." My father joined us, along with Dr. Hartwell and several other faces I now recognized from my research. The inner circle of the modern covenant. "We're so proud of how you've matured," my father said, placing his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that might have looked paternal to observers, but felt like a predator claiming its prey. "Yes," Dr. Hartwell added, his cold eyes studying my face. "Such a remarkable transformation from the troubled young woman we were so concerned about." I smiled serenely. I've learned so much about family loyalty, about the importance of keeping secrets. Something flickered in my mother's eyes. "Tamara." "Oh, don't worry," I assured her. "I understand now. I understand everything." At 8:30, my father called for attention. It was time for the traditional family history presentation, a yearly ritual where family members shared stories, artifacts, and tributes to our illustrious heritage. "This year," my father announced, his voice carrying easily across the crowded hall, "we have something special. My daughter Tamara has prepared artistic tribute to our family's legacy." Applause rippled through the crowd. I saw nods of approval, satisfied smiles. The prodigal daughter had finally come home. I stood slowly, my wrapped painting in my hands, and walked to the front of the room. The string quartet fell silent. Every eye was on me. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Family is everything, isn't it? The bonds that tie us together, the secrets we share, the traditions we pass down through generations." More approving murmurs. My mother beamed with pride. "I've spent years learning about our family's true history," I continued. "And tonight I want to share what I've discovered with all of you." I began to unwrap the painting, but slowly, deliberately, building tension. "Did you know that our prosperity began in 1692? That our ancestor Jeremiah Blackwood was one of the most successful businessmen of his era?" "Tamara." My father's voice carried a note of warning. "He acquired 23 properties during the witch trials," I continued, ignoring him. "Bought them from families whose loved ones had been executed for witchcraft. What a bargain that must have been." The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. I could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. But the really interesting thing is why those particular people were accused. You see, they weren't guilty of witchcraft. They were guilty of something much worse, from Jeremiah's perspective. I pulled away the last of the wrapping paper. They knew the truth. The painting I revealed wasn't one of my 7 masterpieces. It was a decoy, a beautiful but harmless landscape of Salem Harbor. The crowd relaxed slightly, though confusion rippled through the room. "This painting represents the surface of Salem," I said. "The pretty facade we show to the world. But there's so much more beneath the surface, isn't there?" I walked to the far wall, where a large cloth had been draped earlier in the day. No one had questioned it. There were decorations everywhere for the party. "The real masterpiece," I said, grasping the edge of the cloth, "is what lies hidden." I pulled the cloth away, revealing all 7 of my paintings mounted on easels in perfect viewing formation. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps echoed through the hall. Someone screamed. Wine glasses shattered as they fell from nerveless fingers. But it was the faces of the Covenant families that I was watching. The color drained from my father's face. My mother swayed as if she might faint. Dr. Hartwell's hand moved instinctively toward his phone, probably to call security or worse. "What you're seeing," I announced, my voice cutting through the chaos, "is 300 years of Salem's real history. The history the Blackwood family and their partners have killed to protect." "Tamara, stop this immediately," my father commanded, but his voice cracked with panic. The witch trials were a cover-up, I continued relentlessly. 23 innocent people died to hide the crimes of 5 families. And those crimes didn't end in 1692. They continued. Every few years, someone gets too close to the truth. Someone asks too many questions, and they disappear. I pointed to the 6th painting, the modern altar scene. Dr. James Morrison from Harvard University, 1923. Sarah Chen, investigative journalist, 1967. Michael Torres, genealogist, 1989. Patricia Williams, documentary filmmaker, 2018. With each name, I saw recognition and horror dawn on faces in the crowd. Some of these people had known the victims, had wondered what happened to them. All murdered, I said. All sacrificed to protect the covenant. You're insane. Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, his professional mask slipping to reveal something cold and dangerous beneath. Just like your great aunt, the same delusions, the same paranoid fantasies. Am I? I smiled at him. Then explain this. I walked to the 7th painting, the map. These are the locations where you buried them. This hacked every victim for the past century, hidden on Blackwood family land. Land that was conveniently donated to the city as historical preservation areas to ensure the bodies would never be disturbed. The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting, pushing toward the exits, pulling out phones to call police. But the members of the 5 families weren't running. They were advancing on me. You stupid, arrogant girl, my father snarled, his civilized facade completely gone. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've exposed the truth. Isn't that what art is supposed to do? The truth? My mother laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The truth is that some people are born to rule and others are born to serve. The truth is that power requires sacrifice. The truth is that we are the inheritors of something far older and more important than your petty moral concerns. Dr. Hartwell was speaking rapidly into his phone. Security guards, not the usual party staff, but hard-faced men I'd never seen before, were moving through the crowd, blocking exits. But I had planned for this. I should mention, I said conversationally, that I've been live streaming this entire event. Thousands of people are watching right now. And I've also sent copies of all my research, along with high-resolution images of these paintings, to every major news outlet in the country. Oh, and the FBI. The advancing men stopped. My father's face went from pale to purple. You're bluffing. I held up my phone, showing the live viewer count, 47,832 and climbing. The internet is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Especially when you're trying to expose a centuries-old conspiracy. What happened next would be replayed on news channels for weeks. Dr. Hartwell lunged at me, clearly intending violence. But Marcus, my brother Marcus, stepped between us. No, he said firmly. It ends here. It ends tonight. Marcus, you don't understand, my father began. I understand perfectly, Marcus replied. I've understood for years. I just didn't have the courage to do anything about it. He looked at me with something that might have been admiration. But Tamara does. The live stream was going viral. #Salem Conspiracy was trending on social media. Police sirens were already audible in the distance. Not the corrupt local cops who were probably on the Covenant's payroll, but state police and federal agents. My mother made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Tamara, darling, please. Think about what you're doing to your family. We can work something out. We can. Make me disappear like Isabella? I interrupted. Like all the others? I don't think so, Mother. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Defeat. You have no idea what you've unleashed, she whispered. The Covenant exists for a reason. There are things in this world that require management, powers that must be contained. You think you've exposed evil, but you've actually freed it. Before I could ask what she meant, the doors burst open and FBI agents flooded the room. What followed was a blur of arrests, questioning, and chaos that would consume Salem for months. The 5 families' patriarchs were taken into custody. Search warrants were executed on properties across the city. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed what my paintings had revealed: dozens of bodies buried on Blackwood land. The media descended on Salem like locusts. The Salem Conspiracy became the story of the decade. Documentary crews, book deals, movie rights, everyone wanted a piece of the story. And at the center of it all was my art. The 7 paintings became the most famous artworks of the 21st century. Museums around the world bid for the right to display them. Art critics called them the most powerful fusion of artistic vision and historical revelation in modern history. I was vindicated in ways I had never imagined possible. But as I stood in the ruins of my family's empire, watching my parents led away in handcuffs, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. My mother's final words kept echoing in my mind. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Because there was one detail I hadn't shared with the FBI. One painting I hadn't displayed at the reunion. In my research, I discovered that the Covenant wasn't just about covering up murders. The original 5 families hadn't just profited from the witch trials. They'd actually been practicing something the accused witches never had. Real witchcraft. Dark magic. Ancient rituals that required blood sacrifice to maintain their power and prosperity. And according to the documents I'd found hidden with Isabella's paintings, their power was tied to the land itself. The bodies weren't just hidden. They were feeding something. Something that had kept Salem under the Covenant's control for 3 centuries. But now, the Covenant was broken. The families were scattered or imprisoned. The carefully maintained rituals had been interrupted. And in the days following the reunion, strange things began happening in Salem. Power outages that affected only buildings owned by the 5 families. Unexplained fires in locations connected to the witch trials. And people, descendants of the original accused witches, reporting dreams, visions, and abilities they'd never experienced before. It was as if something that had been sleeping beneath Salem for 300 years was finally waking up. And I was beginning to understand that my revenge had accomplished something far more significant than exposing a conspiracy. I had broken a supernatural prison. The real witches of Salem, the ones who had been silenced and murdered in 1692, weren't resting in peace. They were rising. And they wanted their own revenge. As I sat in my empty house the night after the arrests, staring at the hidden 8th painting I'd never shown anyone, a painting that showed Salem's future, painted in colors that seemed to move and shift in the lamplight, I realized that my story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Because sometimes, when you expose the truth, you discover that the truth is far stranger and more dangerous than the lies it replaced. And sometimes, revenge is just the first act in a much larger drama. The phone rang at exactly midnight. When I answered, there was only silence for a moment. Then a voice that sounded like wind through autumn leaves. "Thank you, daughter of Blackwood. The debts of 1692 can finally be paid." The line went dead. Outside my window, Salem's streetlights began to flicker and die, one by one, until the entire city was plunged into darkness. But in that darkness, other lights began to appear. Pale, dancing flames that had no earthly source. And I understood, with a certainty that made my blood freeze, that the real story of Salem was just beginning to unfold. My revenge had been perfect. But some victories come with a price that's only revealed after it's too late to change course. The Covenant families had spent 3 centuries suppressing something far more powerful than historical truth. They had been keeping the real witches of Salem locked away in whatever realm the dead inhabit. And now, thanks to me, those witches were free. Free to reclaim their city. Free to balance the scales of justice in ways that would make my artistic revenge look like a child's prank. As I watched those ghostly flames dance through Salem's darkened streets, I realized that I had become part of something much larger than family betrayal and personal vindication. I had become the instrument of a supernatural reckoning that had been 3 centuries in the making. And there was no painting in the world that could capture what was coming next. The dead don't need artists to tell their stories. They can tell them perfectly well themselves. 6 months later, Salem had become a very different place. The FBI investigation had confirmed everything my paintings revealed. Dozens of bodies were recovered from Blackwood properties. The surviving members of the 5 families were awaiting trial on charges ranging from murder to conspiracy to racketeering. I had become famous, the artist who exposed the Salem conspiracy. My paintings toured museums worldwide. I gave lectures about art as historical documentation, book deals, movie rights, gallery representations, all the success I had dreamed of as a humiliated child. But success came with shadows. Salem itself was changing. The city that had once run like clockwork under the Covenant's hidden control was now chaotic, unpredictable. Streetlights failed without explanation. Electronic devices malfunctioned near historical sites. And the people, descendants of both accusers and accused from 1692, were experiencing things they couldn't explain. Dreams of the past, visions of long-dead relatives, and some were developing abilities that seemed to run in bloodlines that stretched back 3 centuries. I should have been celebrating. I had achieved the perfect revenge, not just against my family, but against 300 years of injustice. Instead, I was terrified, because every night, when Salem's artificial lights failed and those otherworldly flames appeared in their place, I could feel something watching me. Something that had been watching our family for generations. The real witches of Salem weren't just free. They were evaluating me. Was I their ally, the one who had finally broken their chains? Or was I simply another Blackwood, another descendant of the families who had destroyed them? I painted frantically during those long nights, trying to capture what I was seeing, what I was feeling. But my new paintings were different from anything I'd created before. They seemed to paint themselves, showing me scenes I'd never witnessed, people I'd never met. Bridget Bishop, the first woman executed in 1692, standing in my studio, watching me work. Sarah Good, cursing the families who had condemned her words echoing across 3 centuries. Martha Corey, the church member whose piety hadn't saved her, reaching out with spectral hands toward something just beyond my canvas. And always, in every painting, the same message written in script that looked like Isabella's handwriting but couldn't be. The accounting is not complete. I tried to research what was happening, but the answers I found only deepened my fear. Salem's supernatural activity had patterns. It was growing stronger, more focused. And it was centered on one target, the descendants of the 5 Covenant families. My father died in prison. Heart attack, the coroner said. But the guards reported that he'd been found clutching a piece of paper with 23 names written on it, the names of the witch trial victims. Dr. Hartwell went insane in his cell, claiming he could see dead women surrounding him, whispering accusations in languages he didn't recognize. Marcus disappeared entirely. His apartment was found empty except for a painting I'd never seen before, a perfect portrait of our family, but with our faces replaced by skulls. One by one, everyone connected to the Covenant was facing supernatural justice, and I was the only Blackwood left. The night it happened, I was ready for it. I'd set up my easel in the center of Salem Common, the exact spot where the gallows had stood in 1692. My final painting would be created here, where it all began. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in seconds. The air filled with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something like herbs and old blood. They appeared slowly, materializing from the darkness like figures stepping out of a photograph. 23 women, each bearing the marks of how they died. Some with rope burns around their necks, others crushed by stones, all of them watching me with eyes that held 3 centuries of accumulated rage. Tamara Blackwood, one of them spoke. Bridget Bishop, I realized, the woman from my dreams. Daughter of murderers, child of thieves. You have broken the chains that bound us, but that does not absolve your bloodline. I exposed the truth, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I brought justice. You brought revelation, another voice corrected. Sarah Good stepped forward, her form more solid than the others. But justice requires balance. Your family took 23 lives. 23 souls were condemned for your ancestors' crimes. What do you want from me? The debt must be paid, Bridget Bishop said simply. Blood for blood, soul for soul. I understood then. My revenge against my family had been just the beginning. The real accounting was between the living and the dead. Ciao. Between the guilty and the innocent. Between 3 centuries of lies and 1 moment of truth. I won't run, I said. I won't hide like they did. Something like approval flickered across their spectral faces. No, Sarah Good said. You won't run, but you also won't die. Not yet. What do you mean? Bridget Bishop smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful at the same time. You will paint, Tamara Blackwood. You will paint the truth of every injustice, every hidden crime, every buried secret in this cursed city. You will be our voice in the world of the living. And if I refuse? You won't refuse. Martha Corey stepped forward. Because you understand now what your great aunt Isabella understood. Art is not about beauty or fame or revenge. Art is about truth, and truth demands to be told. I felt something change inside me then. A shift, like a door opening in my mind. Suddenly, I could see not just the 23 women standing before me, but everyone who had ever died unjustly in Salem. Centuries of victims, all waiting for their stories to be told. You will paint them all, Bridget Bishop commanded. Every murdered soul, every hidden crime, every family secret that festers in darkness. You will be Salem's memory, and through your art, the dead will finally have their justice. The ghostly figures began to fade as dawn approached, but their final words echoed in the morning air. The accounting is not complete. It will never be complete. And you, last daughter of Blackwood, will ensure it continues. I picked up my brush and began to paint. That was 5 years ago. Salem is famous now for reasons that have nothing to do with witch trials tourism. It's become known as the most haunted city in America, where the supernatural is not just legend, but daily reality. And I am its chronicler. My paintings now fill multiple galleries, but they're not displayed for profit or fame. They're testimonies, evidence, each one documenting an injustice, revealing a truth, giving voice to someone who died without one. I paint constantly, driven by visions that come to me in dreams and waking moments alike. The dead of Salem queue up in my studio, waiting their turn to have their stories told. Some people call me mad, like they called Isabella, but madness and truth have always been close companions in my family. Others call me Salem's conscience, the living link between past and present. I call myself what I've always been, an artist who paints what she sees. And what I see, every day and every night, is the truth that lies beneath the surface of our carefully constructed world. The truth that some debts can never be forgiven, some secrets can never stay buried, and some revenge is so perfect, so complete, that it transforms from personal vendetta into cosmic justice. My family tried to silence me, to break the artist in me, to make me complicit in their centuries of crime. Instead, they created the instrument of their own destruction. And in destroying them, I discovered something far more powerful than revenge: purpose. The dead have chosen me as their voice, and I will paint their truths until my dying breath. Because that's what artists do. We show the world what it doesn't want to see. And sometimes, if we're very good at what we do, we change the world forever. Salem will never be the same. Neither will I. And that, I've learned, is exactly as it should be. Some art is meant to comfort, mine is meant to haunt. And in a city built on 3 centuries of lies, haunting is the most honest thing you can do. The brushes are calling, the dead are waiting, and there are so many more stories to tell.